As Alien Week continues, we now return to the world of alien megastructures, a concept that many scientists scoff at as being either impossible from an engineering perspective or simply impractical. The Kardashev scale that so many people talk about is widely regarded as being a piece of science fiction that no civilization, no matter how advanced, would ever have a reason to construct something as immense as a Dyson sphere, or indeed something big enough to absorb all of the solar radiation striking a planet. If you need that much energy, that means that your civilization has really outgrown its planet and needs to expand elsewhere without building enormous structures throughout the solar system, utilizing enormous amounts of material. It's been calculated that, for example, the amount of energy that it would take to tear Mercury apart in order to use it as source material to build a Dyson sphere would be far greater than the amount of energy that you would gather from such a thing. So why the hell would an alien civilization actually construct something that we could see from hundreds or even thousands of light years away? And of course, that explains why we haven't actually seen anything like that. No evidence whatsoever, or so we've been told. However, there are two stellar systems in particular that haven't received nearly as much coverage as the famous Tabby star that have proven to be some of the most remarkable objects that we have ever detected in our galaxy. They've eclipsed far more light than whatever it is that's orbiting Tabby star, and that is, by the way, most probably the debris and dust being generated from an exomoon being torn apart. However, the structure orbiting J1407, and by the way, that's not the star at the middle of this structure, but rather probably a brown dwarf of some kind, is perhaps the most amazing of these structures that we can point towards. Now, this object, known as J1407b, is undoubtedly a ring system of some kind, but it's on an absolutely colossal scale. This thing is 1.2 astronomical units in diameter, 180 million kilometers, and not only is it immense, it's also extremely dense. At some points during its observation, this ring system blocked out 95% of the light being generated by its companion star. That is much more dense than Saturn. Now, given its observed structure, it has been published, and it is widely believed that this is a natural ring system of some kind in orbit around the star, but there are some big inconsistencies that I have some questions about. And also, there's another star that's an even better candidate for an alien megastructure, and we're gonna find out about both of those in just a moment. Day 15, year 885 of the new calendar. After an extremely lengthy journey, even by the standards of people who are traveling at near light speeds, we are finally closing in on our destination. Hundreds of light years we've traversed, and I'll tell ya, I'm about done with this. It is an amazing thing to watch the stars streak by at an unnatural speed, and the weird things that that happen when you're traveling this close to the speed of light, but still, as I said, I'm about done with it. But hell, it could be a lot worse. I grew up on a tidally locked planet, a place where you had a very narrow habitable zone and resources that people scrabbled over desperately. And really, that's been the problem with human civilization for centuries now. The vast majority of the planets that we've found that are somewhere close to Sol are all tidally locked planets orbiting red dwarfs or extremely hostile planets like Mars. And we found that terraforming these kinds of planets takes thousands, if not millions of years. And honestly, our rapidly growing civilization just can't handle thousands or millions of years to terraform a planet. We need a very large habitable space to handle human civilization before we completely destroy or consume the resources of the easily colonizable planets that we've found already. And this is becoming more and more of a crisis with every passing year. And given the fact that it takes more than 2 centuries for us to traverse the distance between our struggling empire and more promising systems like the one we're approaching, we really can't take any chances. So this is not just an exploration mission, this is a colonization mission with thousands of hopeful colonists who are praying that the location that we're closing in on is going to be a suitable world. However, everything we've observed up to this point indicates that this could be the salvation of our civilization. The system previously known as J1407, but now simply known as the Disk, is the most amazing discovery that we have ever come across. For many years, we believed that this was a naturally formed ring system. Now, we're not quite so sure, because we've determined that the inner zone of this system that is closest to the Brown Dwarf is also habitable and has its own atmosphere. The bizarre disk world that we're talking about in our fictional tale is something called an Alderson disk, and it was named after Dan Alderson, a scientist with the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory who wrote the software used to navigate the Voyager 1 and 2 probes. The idea behind this disk is it would have to be several thousand kilometers thick and have a radius of several astronomical units, unless, of course, it was orbiting a star that wasn't nearly as bright or as hot as our own star, and that would fit with a brown dwarf. The habitable zone surrounding a brown dwarf actually extends out for a distance of about 1 to 2 million kilometers, perhaps a little bit further. So the star would reside in a hole in the center, and all the points on the disk would experience perpetual twilight, unless the star was made to bob up and down. However, keep in mind that this ring system is orbiting another star, and so therefore would have another source of light, which would be highly variable, by the way, because this system is orbiting the star in a highly eccentric orbit. Not only is this ring system enormous and bizarre, it's also orbiting the star unlike anything that should have naturally formed there. But that's not the only strange thing about this system. Just like an Alderson disk, some parts of it are indeed thousands of kilometers thick. They have to be, because they've blocked out as much as 95% of the star's light when they've passed in front of it. And by the way, our analyses do not include the entire ring system. Rather, we are only getting a small picture of what this ring system is actually doing. As you can see here, the dips in light generated by the star as the various ring systems pass in front of them is tremendous, extending as much as 90% or 95%. And as you can see right there, there is a huge area where no data was taken. Now, by way of comparison, Habby star at most obscured 30% of the light from its host star. So we're talking about a ring system that's over 100 million miles in diameter and far, far more dense than Saturn's rings, containing an insane amount of mass. We're talking anywhere from 13 to 26 Jupiter masses, and there's a high degree of uncertainty in that estimate. Now, one thing I'd like you to consider: Jupiter in our own solar system contains more mass than the rest of the solar system combined. Well, if you exclude the sun, of course. That means that we're looking at a maximum of maybe 2 or perhaps 3 Jupiter masses if there are things that we haven't observed in our own solar system at most, whereas this ring system contains anywhere from a dozen to 24 Jupiter masses. Where did all of this mass come from? And more importantly, why did it gravitate towards a much smaller brown dwarf as opposed to a much larger star that it currently orbits? And there are other problems. J1407, the host star, doesn't appear to have any sort of large debris disk or any sort of additional planets as we would expect with an evolving solar system. Instead, all we have is this one mysterious object, and by the way, we don't know that it's a brown dwarf, that's just a theory, and this enormous ring system, and that's about it. And by the way, this bizarre, eccentric, retrograde orbit is the only way that this thing could possibly survive orbiting a star in its current configuration, which means if it was orbiting the star with a normal orbital pattern, the star would rip a ring system like this apart. And even so, this ring system is unlikely to survive for many more thousands of years. That is to say, if it is indeed natural. But what if it isn't? I mean, we already have many characteristics of this system that seem very unusual and actually kind of implausible if we're talking about what we understand with planetary evolution. This thing has sucked up all the matter in the solar system, the parent star has taken no matter whatsoever, and it has formed a ring system of unbelievable size and unbelievable density. What if it is artificial? Because keep in mind, we haven't observed the innermost part of this system. That is to say, the part that's the closest to the brown dwarf, and therefore the part that would theoretically be habitable. What happens if that part passes in front of the star when we're collecting data and it obscures it completely rather than partially as we would expect for the inner rings of a natural ring system? Well, we're not going to find out until this thing passes in front of its host star again, which it hasn't done since 2007. That alone is also strange. Day 1, year 963 of the new calendar. Nearly a century has passed since my earliest log entry in regards to this colonization effort, and yet very little time has passed as far as we're concerned because of the unbelievable velocity that we were traveling at to reach our destination. Even though I've been traveling the stars nearly all my life, I still can't get used to the whole concept of time dilation. Everybody that I left behind on my homeworld have been dead for almost 2 centuries, but you know what? It just doesn't matter because we've accomplished our mission far more fantastically than anybody could have anticipated. This world contains everything we need to save our civilization. It contains enough livable space to house our entire population dozens of times over, and that's every single world in the Empire. We don't know who built this thing. We don't know how they built it, but they clearly built it with habitation in mind, and we are not the first visitors to this strange place. Other species have come here, some of them sophisticated, and yet for some reason they have degraded into a state of utter barbarism. Some of these creatures are completely terrifying in appearance. Some of them were indeed hostile, but fortunately their primitive technology was no match for our advanced weapon systems, and in time we discovered that they were far more terrified of us than we were of them. After a considerable amount of effort was made with a number of prisoners, we were able to translate some of their language, and we determined that they were frightened of us because we came from the outside. They seemed to be well aware of the fact that somebody from another place built this vast homeworld teeming with life, and indeed, one of the first things that they asked us to do was to leave, and not in a hostile way, but rather as kind of a warning. We weren't really sure how to interpret that, although given how primitive they were, we really wrote the entire idea off as ancient superstition of some kind from a species that had degraded into utter barbarism, and yet all of them shared the same name for the god that built their world, and it was called Omega Null. Before we finish the tale of our intrepid explorers, it's also worth mentioning that this is not the only example of a possible alien megastructure that we found in our survey of a variety of different stars throughout the galaxy. I've mentioned one called VVV-WIT-08 in a previous video, linked at the end of this one, but there is another discovered in 2012 called VVV-WIT-07. This one also was extremely strange, and it put the unusual dimming of Tabby star to shame. Over the course of 11 days, the amplitude of this star dimmed slowly for about 11 days, and then all of a sudden it dropped to next to nothing over the course of the next 48 days. It blocked 80% of the measured light, which is unbelievable compared to what Tabby star did, which once again was 30% at most, and really more about 20% or so. The dimming is not consistent with that of a planet, or with a binary star companion, or with a dust cloud, or a vast cloud of comets, or any other natural explanation that we've been able to come up with, at least since we started studying this star. Now, of course, this star has not been extensively studied since it was discovered in 2012. It has been kept under close observation, but nevertheless, it remains an extreme mystery. An alien megastructure remains on the table as a theoretical possibility because it doesn't fit with any known astronomical phenomena. A very bizarre, unusual dust cloud theoretically could be an explanation, but would have to be something completely different, far more dense and far more extreme than anything detected in the past. And up to this point, the researchers find that explanation to be highly unlikely. According to ESO astronomer Valentin Ivanov, quote, "A key word that could be used to describe our finding of VVV-WIT-07 is extreme. In every aspect, we have identified a system that challenges the imagination even more than usual because it is so unlike our own planetary system." And by the way, the examples that I've listed in my various videos are by no means the only candidates for extraterrestrial megastructures. We really have only begun to scratch the surface of researching this possibility. Now, once again, there is so little support amongst the general scientific community opportunity to even theorize about stuff like this. Astronomers who even mention the possibility of alien megastructures accounting for these strange phenomena that we've detected around a number of stars tend to be subjected to very harsh criticism and ridicule, and also put their future careers and chances for acquiring grant money, which is so important to an astronomer's future research, in deep jeopardy. Therefore, very, very few astronomers seriously talk about things like this. But as we are about to discover, an alien megastructure could be a sign of something truly wonderful, truly astounding, and truly useful to our civilization, or something that could be truly lethal. On my personal authority as an admiral in the Terran Empire, I am calling for a Red 1 mobilization and evacuation of all settled worlds within 300 light years of the star known as J1407b. Our colonization of what we once thought to be the salvation of our empire has now become the possible source of our ultimate extinction. The Omega Null is no legend. It is no mysterious god. It is real, and it has always been just beneath our feet. For many years, we have been researching this strange ring system, trying to determine why it was built in the first place. If it was built simply for habitation, it is entirely too large and gathers far too much energy to be used for that simple purpose. It gathers trillions of watts every microsecond, far more than its habitable area would possibly require, and now we understand why. Just beneath the habitable surface, beneath all the rich topsoil, we have discovered a material that is unlike anything we have ever detected, a material that is identical, as if metal could actually be cloned and mass-produced. What we have determined it to be is a self-replicating machine civilization that has one simple directive: to gather whatever matter it can and to create duplicates of itself. Why it exists beneath the surface of a perfectly habitable world is difficult for us to understand. There are legends of a rival civilization known simply as We Who Became One that this Omega Null seems to be hiding from, and the instant that we found any evidence of its existence, it unleashed the full force of its frightful technology against us. Nanomachines in their trillions immediately converted not only technology, but living human beings as well into duplicates of the Omega Null. The only reason my ship was not subjected to this fate is because we were in distant orbit around the structure conducting in-depth research. The fate of our colonists is not known to me. All that I do know is all of their active technology have now been converted into duplicates of the Omega Null, and if there are any survivors, they are doomed to descend into the same level of barbarism as the rest of the unfortunate creatures on this cursed disk world. And now, at this point, our only objective is to head home as swiftly as possible and spread the word. However, the Omega Null, having consumed all of our technology and therefore presumably all of our knowledge, seems well aware of the danger that this knowledge represents. The energy generated by this vast structure is capable not only of sustaining a vast machine civilization and an impossibly powerful intellect, but also to send interstellar weapons to destroy every one of our settled planets, with the presumed objective of destroying all of the knowledge of its existence, possibly in an effort to continue to hide itself from this mysterious species known as We Who Became One. but none of that matters right now. It is absolutely imperative that the Empire prepare itself for these incoming weapons of mass destruction. Fortunately, we are traveling close to relativistic speeds ourselves, and therefore are at least currently able to evade any sort of pursuit or enemy weapons fire from the Omega Null. However, it has been determined that another possible use of this megastructure would be to utilize a high-energy plasma beam traveling at light speed, which would be able to overtake us. Why the Omega Null has not done this up to this point is beyond